Hello, I am Bob the Bookerer and welcome to my channel. Today I am going to be talking about Lucy by the Sea, the fourth in the series by Elizabeth Strout that follows the sort of the Amgash, I guess, quartet now, following this character Lucy Barton, first introduced to us in My Name is Lucy Barton. And I will talk about some spoilers later in this review, but for the most part this should be relatively spoiler free, and I'll announce before that comes anyway. But just to say, overall, I really enjoyed this a lot more than I probably thought I would, given that it's a book that deals with COVID and that still feels very recent. And also given that the Lucy Barton series I've mostly enjoyed, but you know, I sometimes have almost wanted it to go and sort of punch a little bit harder, and I think there are parts of this book that do that for me. So strap yourselves in and we'll talk a little bit about Lucy by the Sea. So, as the name suggests, at one point we end up by the sea, but to get there first, a few things need to happen in our narrative. We have Lucy Barton, we have her partner William, as we may have also guessed from Oh William, the last book in the series. The story then is really focused on them, particularly right at the beginning stages of COVID and it hitting the world. William being a scientist, there's a sort of a knowingness where he starts to see things coming before Lucy does. So he starts getting quite worried. He tells Lucy to pack up all of her things. This is again right at the beginning of the book, so this part is not a spoiler. To pack up all of her things and to get ready to go. She is understandably quite confused by this. She does all those things I think many of us did early on into the pandemic of, oh, well, I'll just take a couple of things because it'll only be like a week or two, right? And he encourages her to take a few more things. He packs her laptop for her almost at one point because she's sort of like, I won't need this. And they move to the seaside to kind of almost as a bit of a homecoming in some ways. And this is, I think, where the heart of this book really is about, because, you know, at this stage, particularly following the three books before from Lucy Barton, about Lucy Barton, we have seen her kind of build this life from kind of going from a life of poverty in Amgash, necessarily chip on her shoulder, but kind of this feeling deep down that things are not quite right because she's come from a place of insecurity. She's come from being one of the poor, the poorest people in her town. She's been at school with people who are wealthier than her and have all these things that she doesn't have. So she's used to kind of scraping by. And by this point in the series, she is a woman who has established quite a good career. She writes, she's fairly well established, she lives in New York, and all of these things have sort of built up to her feeling a bit more secure, albeit still with the sort of echoes of that in her past, because I don't think that ever really goes away for people who have grown up in poverty or kind of with some kind of insecurity around food or money or housing or what have you. And so we start to see actually how those two things interact. So now that she's gone from a period of security with New York to going back home, but also going back home far wealthier, far more secure, but during a global pandemic where she suddenly then doesn't quite know how to feel. She's better prepared than she would have been had it happened to her 30, 40 years ago, but she's still not okay. She still has a lot of things to worry about, and particularly we start to see the ramifications of that on a small town. And the people in the small town mostly do the right thing. They mostly look after each other. There's obviously a sense of fear and insecurity and panic around everybody, but for the most part people seem to be looking after each other. We then also get a couple of characters in there who have clearly been affected by various other things going on. For example, we meet a character who is convinced that everything is a hoax, and that leads to some quite difficult conversations between Lucy, who for the most part is a very practical, pragmatic kind of person who just wants to make sure everybody's okay. And she's also really going through things in her own head. So she's not quite sure how to deal with this family member who really believes these things. She is torn between cutting them off entirely or trying to reason with them. And that's something that I think many people have found during the last 2.5 years. And so I think this book really cleverly grapples with some of those things. And particularly the first half of this book, I thought was really well handled in terms of picking up all the little nuances of the last 2.5 years, what they've looked like, particularly that early stage where nobody really knew anything. And where everything is laced with terror. Like, we can meet up with you, but I need to be standing far away from you. And also, I don't know if that's okay. And in the midst of all of this, there are also various family dramas going on. We have relationships breaking up and reforming. We have all these other things happening. And they've got to navigate those alongside some of the tricky bits. Lucy is trying to work out how to be a good mother whilst making sure that she is also looking after herself. She knows that she can't be involved in her kids' lives in quite the same way, but also they're going through more than they maybe ever have before. So she needs to find out a way of being able to be there. And likewise, they start worrying about her. And all of that I thought was really quite clever. It then starts building towards a few more about the relationship breakdowns, which I'll be honest, I didn't really fully care about in the biggest sense. I thought they were very well handled. I'm not sure if I necessarily bought into them fully, but I still overall enjoyed it. And I think particularly following on from Oh William, that actually felt those two books I think work really nicely together. But we then kind of get further and further towards the end, and this is where I'll go into some spoilers. So I'm going to do that in just a sec, but just wanted to say first, overall, I think this book is really well done. It's very well handled. It's very sensitive about what was an incredibly difficult thing that many people went through. But I think at the same time, this book does acknowledge that people have gone through this very differently. I don't think it fully goes into detail about a lot of that, but I think there's a real tenderness and a real softness to this book that that really captures what's kind of going on there. So this is a 4 out of 5 for me. I just think it has some really beautiful and moving passages. So I do urge you to check it out, particularly if you've enjoyed the Amgash series or other books by her. I will also say, forgot to mention earlier, there's a fleeting reference to Olive Kitteridge at one point, who is, I think, mentioned 2 or 3 times, almost always with her full name, I think, of just sort of like, oh, I was seeing my friend, Olive Kitteridge. Sort of as a like nod, wink, wink to the audience of like, oh yes, also existing within the Elizabeth Strout universe. The I don't know, the Amgash metaverse in some ways all exists, that, you know, Olive Kitteridge is a friend of a friend, and we are told in the narrative, and I think in quite a gentle way that feels very generous from Elizabeth Strout, we're told that Olive is struggling a little bit but is okay, and that felt like a nice sort of reach out to the audience and particularly the readers of the 2 Olive books, to kind of say, actually, your character's okay. She's all right now. She's made it through just about okay. Anyway, I'm going to go into some spoilers, and feel free to cut out now if you need to. But I really enjoyed this book, and I do hope you enjoy it if you've enjoyed the others of her series. So, going into some spoilers here, the relationship between Lucy and William is a core part of this book. We basically learn that many parts of the relationship are sort of broken up and they've started kind of coming back together. And so a lot of this book is them having basically navigated parts of this pandemic together in terms of moving in closer to each other. And their children are very confused by this because, as far as they see it, they're like, I don't get what the point is breaking up and then coming back together. Like, just make it a clean break or don't do it at all. But actually, there's a recognition that they've chosen a path that makes a lot of sense for them. Incredibly complicated thing going on, but there's something that makes sense for them, and they've done it, and that's okay. And I thought that was really, again, quite nicely done in this book, that we learn a lot more about how, you know, when one of the daughters has a horrible relationship breakup where her partner's cheated on her, Lucy is sort of torn. She wants to jump in and really help, but she also recognises that distance is hard here. So she does what she can, and William is also involved in talking to this man directly and saying, how dare you? How dare you do this to this woman? this is not okay. But as is brought up, you know, this guy comes back and says to William, well, who are you to talk, you know, about marriage infidelity, like relationship infidelity, because look what you've done in the past. And actually he's able to say, yes, with the benefit of hindsight, I know that I was in the wrong. I know that I did an awful thing, and that's why I'm judging you now, because I know how awful it is what you've just done. Particularly as this man doesn't seem to feel much sort of much resentment or regret for having done any of this. So yeah, but all of that is then to say that this book towards the later half, particularly the last sort of third, I think, really starts looking at this relationship between these two characters, and it ends really beautifully. But I think it does, for me, I don't know how invested I was in them returning together. Maybe that's on me, but if you'd really enjoyed that aspect of the books leading up to this, then I think you'll really enjoy that here. I thought it was still tenderly done and really, really beautiful, just not where I was. I think I really like Lucy's inner world within this book, and this book does quite a lot of that in a really great way. Anyway, I have been Bob the Booker talking about this book. I hope you do enjoy it, particularly if you've enjoyed the Amgash series up till now. If you haven't, I'm not sure if this book's going to change your mind. I think it's still worth it as a standalone read, even if you've not read any of the rest of the trilogy before, because I think it can sort of stand alone, particularly in terms of what it says about COVID. I also will not be surprised if this gets longlisted for the Booker, given that it's just within the beginning part of this year, and that, you know, My Name is Lucy Barton was longlisted, Oh William was shortlisted. This book I can see being, you know, being there as well. Anyway, I've been Bob the Booker talking about this book. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye bye.